The deafening sound of gunfire split the air as Clara Davenport clutched her daughter's small hand and fled behind the overturned wagon. The year was 1876, and what should have been a simple journey west had turned into a nightmare when bandits attacked their wagon train just outside of Cottonwood Creek, Arizona territory. "Mama, I'm scared," 5-year-old Lily whispered, her blue eyes wide with terror. "Hush now," Clara soothed, though her own heart hammered against her ribs. "Remember what Papa taught us. Be brave when the world isn't." The mention of Thomas brought fresh pain. 6 months a widow, and still the wound felt raw. The tuberculosis had taken him quickly, leaving Clara with nothing but memories, a small pouch of savings, and a daughter to raise alone in Boston, where opportunities for women were scarce and judgment plentiful. When the gunfire finally ceased, Clara peered cautiously around the wagon. 3 men lay dead: the wagon master and 2 other travelers. The bandits had taken the strongbox and most of their supplies before disappearing into the hills. "We can't stay here," announced one of the surviving men, a merchant heading to California. "Those devils might return. Everyone gather what you can. We're pushing on to Cottonwood Creek." Clara surveyed the remains of her belongings scattered across the dusty ground. The small trunk containing her and Lily's clothing remained, but their food provisions were gone. The merchant and his family offered her a ride in their crowded wagon, but Clara could see the hesitation in the woman's eyes. Another mouth to feed, too. Counting Lily would strain their own limited supplies. 3 days later, the diminished wagon train rolled into Cottonwood Creek. Clara stood in the dusty main street, trunk at her feet and Lily's hand in hers, watching as the merchant's wagon continued westward. They'd left her with directions to the local boarding house, but little else. "Mrs. Jenkins takes in boarders," the merchant's wife had explained apologetically. "We'd take you further, but with winter coming." Clara understood. Everyone had their own survival to consider. The boarding house, when she found it, displayed a sign in the window: "No vacancies. Mrs. Jenkins," a stern-faced woman with graying hair pinned severely at her nape, offered no alternatives. "Town's full up with miners and cowboys," she explained without sympathy. "The saloon rents rooms, but not to women with children." She eyed Clara's threadbare dress. "You got family hereabouts?" "No, madam," Clara admitted. "My husband's cousin has a ranch north of here. We were hoping to find him." "What's the name?" "Jansen. Keith Jansen." Mrs. Jenkins's expression softened slightly. "The Flying J, that's a good day's ride north. Keith Jansen comes to town for supplies every few weeks." She hesitated, then added, "He's changed since his wife died. Keeps to himself mostly. Not sure he'd welcome company." Clara's hopes dimmed. "When was he last in town?" 2 weeks ago. Won't be back for a while, I reckon, Mrs. Jenkins glanced at Lily, who was slumping against Clara's skirts, exhausted from the journey. "Look, there's a livery stable down the street. Old Sam Peterson might let you sleep in the hayloft for a night or 2 until you figure something out." It wasn't much, but it was something. "Thank you," Clara said, gathering her trunk. The livery owner, a grizzled man with kind eyes, took pity on them. "Lost my own daughter to cholera some years back," he explained, showing them to a clean corner of the hayloft. "Got some stew on the fire, too, if you're hungry." That night, lying in the hay with Lily curled against her side, Clara stared up at the rafters. She had exactly $8.17 to her name. Not enough for a stagecoach ride back east. Not enough to start a new life here. Her only hope lay with a cousin by marriage she'd never met, who by all accounts had become a recluse since his own wife's death. At dawn, Clara made her decision. "Mr. Peterson," she asked as the livery owner fed his horses, "might I hire a horse to ride north? I need to find the Flying J Ranch." Peterson scratched his chin doubtfully. "That's rough country, madam, and you with a little one." "I can ride," Clara assured him. "My father taught me as a girl." It wasn't entirely true she'd ridden placid mares around Boston Common, nothing like the journey ahead. "Keith Jansen's place is near Cottonwood Creek, about 15 miles north," Peterson finally said. "Follow the creek, can't miss it, but he's not one for company these days." "He's my last hope," Clara admitted. Peterson nodded slowly. "I'll lend you old Belle. She's gentle enough for the little one to ride with you. But if Jansen turns you away, you come straight back, you hear? These hills ain't safe for a woman alone." By mid-morning, Clara and Lily were following Cottonwood Creek northward. Belle plodded steadily, seemingly unbothered by her double burden. The Arizona landscape sprawled around them, red rock formations rising majestically against the clear blue sky, scrubby vegetation clinging to the arid soil. Despite her anxiety, Clara couldn't help but appreciate the wild beauty. "Look, Mama," Lily pointed excitedly. "A rabbit," Clara smiled, grateful for her daughter's resilience. "Yes, darling, there are lots of animals in these hills." They stopped at midday to rest and share the meager provisions Peterson had packed for them: bread, cheese, and a canteen of water. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Clara's fair skin, unaccustomed to such exposure, began to burn despite the bonnet shading her face. They had just remounted when Belle suddenly stopped, ears pricking forward. Clara felt a prickle of unease as the horse snorted nervously. "What is it, girl?" she murmured, scanning the path ahead. The answer came in the form of 3 riders emerging from a stand of cottonwoods. Rough-looking men with unkempt beards and hard eyes. One of them grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Well now," he drawled, "what have we here?" "A little lady out for a ride." Clara's mouth went dry. These weren't simple travelers. "Just passing through," she managed, tightening her arm around Lily. "My husband is expecting us." The lie didn't impress them. The lead rider moved his horse closer. "Ain't no womenfolk out this way 'cept at the Flying J, and Jansen's woman's been dead 2 years. His eyes narrowed. "You're alone." Clara calculated their chances of outrunning the men, slim to none, with Belle carrying double and already tired. "Please," she said, hating the tremor in her voice. "We have nothing of value." "Oh, I wouldn't say that," the man replied, his gaze traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the standoff. The lead rider's hat flew from his head and he cursed, wheeling his horse around. "Next one goes between your eyes, Delaney." The voice came from behind a boulder to their right, deep, steady, and cold as ice. "Back away from the woman." Clara couldn't see the shooter, but the effect on the bandits was immediate. They retreated several paces, the leader scowling as he retrieved his punctured hat. "This ain't your business, Jansen," he called. "Made it my business when you threatened a woman and child on my land." A man emerged from behind the rocks, rifle trained unwaveringly on the lead bandit. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard, he wore a dusty denim shirt and worn leather chaps over his trousers. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes, suggesting he'd once smiled easily, though his expression now was granite hard. "We were just having a friendly chat," Delaney protested. "Save it." The newcomer, Keith Jansen, she presumed, didn't lower his rifle. "You and your boys ride out now, or I start putting holes in things more valuable than hats." For a tense moment, Clara thought the bandits might challenge him. Then Delaney spat on the ground. "Come on, boys. Ain't worth getting shot over." He fixed Clara with a malevolent stare. For now. Only when the riders had disappeared from view did Jansen lower his rifle. He turned his attention to Clara, his expression unchanged. "Thank you," she said, relief making her lightheaded. I don't know what would have happened if, what are you doing out here alone? He interrupted. His tone wasn't unkind exactly, but neither was it welcoming. I'm looking for Keith Jansen, Clara replied. I'm Clara Davenport. This is my daughter, Lily. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. I'm Jansen, don't recall knowing any Davenports. You wouldn't, Clara admitted. My husband Thomas was cousins with your late wife, Elizabeth. They corresponded occasionally. She swallowed hard. Thomas passed 6 months ago. We've come west because we have nowhere else to go. Jansen studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, My ranch is another 3 miles. You can rest there, get your bearings. He mounted his own horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion. But I run cattle, not a charity. I can't take in strays. The word stung, but Clara lifted her chin. I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Jansen, just shelter until I can make other arrangements. He gave a curt nod and turned his horse. Follow me then, and stay close. Delaney and his boys might circle back. The Flying J Ranch emerged from the landscape like a vision, a sturdy 2-story cabin with a wide porch, nestled in a valley where Cottonwood Creek widened. Outbuildings dotted the property, a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and what looked like a smokehouse. A few cowboys paused in their work to watch curiously as Jansen led Clara and Lily into the yard. Rodriguez, Jansen called to a weathered man mending a saddle. Take Belle to the barn, give her grain and water. Yes, boss. The cowhand approached, tipping his hat to Clara. Madam. Jansen helped Clara and Lily dismount, then gestured toward the main house. This way. Inside, the cabin was unexpectedly comfortable, worn but clean, with solid wooden furniture and braided rugs covering the plank floor. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A staircase led to the upper floor. Sit, Jansen said, indicating the table. He moved to the stove where a pot of something simmered. You must be hungry. Clara seated Lily at the table, then hesitated. May I help? No need. He ladled stew into bowls with efficient movements. Not much to it. As they ate, Clara took the opportunity to study her reluctant host more closely. Despite his gruff manner, there was a grace to his movements, a competence that spoke of a man completely at home in his harsh environment. His hands, though calloused from ranch work, were clean, his nails trimmed. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a striking shade of green, framed by the kind of long lashes women envied. So, he said abruptly, breaking into her thoughts. How'd you find me? Clara explained their journey, the wagon train, the bandit attack, their arrival in Cottonwood Creek. Mrs. Jenkins at the boarding house mentioned you. When she had no room for us, Mr. Peterson at the livery let us sleep in his hayloft and lent us Belle. Jansen's expression darkened. You slept in a hayloft. We were grateful for it, Clara said simply. He fell silent, watching as Lily scraped her bowl clean. The child, exhausted from their ordeal, was fighting to keep her eyes open. There's a room upstairs you can use, Jansen finally said. First door on the left. Used to be, he stopped, then continued more gruffly. It's got a bed. Thank you, Mr. Jansen. Keith, he corrected. If you're staying, might as well use my name. Clara nodded, not missing his qualifier. If, not when, not since. Thank you, Keith. The room Keith directed them to clearly belonged to a child, once a girl, judging by the faded floral quilt on the narrow bed and the shelf of well-worn books. Clara felt a pang, wondering if this had been Elizabeth Jansen's room as a child, or perhaps they'd had a daughter. Lily was asleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow. Clara removed her daughter's shoes and covered her with the quilt, then stood at the window, gazing out at the ranch. Keith was in the corral now, working with a spirited young horse. Even from a distance, she could see the careful way he handled the animal, firm but never harsh. What kind of man was he? The one who'd faced down 3 bandits without flinching. The one who'd made it clear their presence was temporary. Or the one who'd fed them and given them shelter without hesitation downstairs. Clara found the kitchen empty. On the table sat a pitcher of water, a cake of soap, and a folded towel, small courtesies she hadn't expected. She washed the day's dust from her face and hands, then set about tidying the kitchen, washing their bowls and the cooking pot. When Keith returned an hour later, he paused in the doorway, clearly surprised to find her there. "Your daughter, sleeping," Clara replied. "I hope you don't mind, I washed up a bit." He nodded, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "Didn't need to do that. I like to earn my keep," Clara said. "I'm a good cook and I can clean, mend clothing, tend a garden." Keith moved to the sink, washing trail dust from his hands and face. "Ranch work is men's business." Clara bit back a retort. She needed his goodwill too much to argue. "Of course, I meant around the house." He dried his hands on a towel, studying her with those penetrating green eyes. "Mrs. Davenport, Clara, please. Clara, I meant what I said earlier. This isn't a permanent arrangement." She met his gaze steadily. "I understand. All I'm asking for is a few days' shelter while I figure out what comes next." Something in her expression must have reached him, because his stern demeanor softened slightly. "You can stay through the week. After that, we'll see." It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had that morning. "Thank you." That evening, Clara cooked dinner using the supplies Keith pointed out in his pantry. It wasn't fancy, just salt pork with beans and cornbread, but Keith ate with obvious appreciation. "Been a while since I had a home-cooked meal," he admitted. "Usually just throw something together myself, or eat what the boys cook in the bunkhouse." "You don't have a housekeeper?" Clara asked, surprised. A ranch this size typically employed someone to manage the household. Keith's expression closed. "Not since Elizabeth died." Clara recognized the warning in his tone and changed the subject. "Your ranch is beautiful. How many acres?" 800, he replied, seeming relieved by the shift. "Run about 500 head of cattle. Got some good grazing land up in the north section." They talked about the ranch through the rest of the meal. Keith, she discovered, was more willing to discuss his cattle operation than personal matters. He'd inherited the property from his father 10 years earlier and expanded it considerably. The Flying J was now one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. "Why the Flying J?" Clara asked as they finished eating. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My father's idea. Said the cattle were the best jumpers in the territory." The smile faded. "He was full of tall tales, my old man." After dinner, Keith excused himself to check on the cattle. Clara cleaned up, then carried a sleeping Lily upstairs to bed. The child hadn't stirred since her afternoon nap, exhausted from their journey. Clara herself was too restless to sleep. She returned downstairs and found a book on the shelf, a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets. The cover was worn, the pages dog-eared with frequent reading. She hadn't expected to find such literature in a cowboy's home. She was still reading when Keith returned. He paused in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. "You like Shakespeare?" he asked. Clara nodded. "My father was a professor of literature at Harvard. He read to me every night as a child." Keith crossed to the sideboard and poured 2 small glasses of whiskey. He offered one to Clara, who hesitated before accepting it. "What brought you west?" he asked, settling into the chair opposite hers. "There must have been opportunities for a widow in Boston." Clara took a small sip of the whiskey, wincing at the burn. "Not as many as you might think. After Thomas died, I tried to maintain his bookshop, but suppliers wouldn't extend credit to a woman. I took in sewing, but it wasn't enough." She stared into the amber liquid. Then Thomas's mother decided Lily should live with her, said I couldn't provide properly. Keith's expression hardened. She tried to take your child. She had influence with a judge, Clara said simply. I sold everything, bought passage west. Thomas had mentioned his cousin Elizabeth had married a rancher in Arizona. It was a desperate gamble. Keith was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, Elizabeth would have welcomed you with open arms. She was like that, generous, always taking in strays. His voice roughened. Wild kittens, injured birds, drifters needing work. I'm sorry for your loss, Clara said softly. Mrs. Jenkins mentioned it's been 2 years. Keith nodded, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Childbed fever. The baby our son lived only a few hours after she was gone. The stark pain in his voice made Clara's heart ache. That's a terrible loss. It is what it is. He drained his glass and stood. Dawn comes early, you should rest. Just like that, the moment of connection was over. Clara finished her whiskey and returned the book to its shelf. Good night, Keith, he nodded, already turning away. Good night. The next few days fell into a pattern. Clara rose early to prepare breakfast before Keith and his ranch hands began their day. Lily, recovering from the journey, stuck close to Clara's side, helping with small chores and exploring the immediate vicinity of the house. Clara, determined to prove her usefulness, threw herself into domestic tasks. She discovered that while the house was fundamentally clean, it lacked a woman's touch. Dust had accumulated in corners. Linens needed mending. The pantry wanted organizing. Keith said nothing about her efforts, but she noticed he began lingering a bit longer over meals, sometimes even making conversation. On the third day, Clara was hanging laundry when she heard Lily's delighted laugh, a sound so rare since Thomas's death that it drew her immediate attention. She rounded the corner of the house to find her daughter in the corral with Keith, sitting atop a small, gentle-looking pony while Keith led it slowly around the perimeter. Mama, look, Lily called excitedly. Mr. Keith says Buttercup is just my size. Clara approached the fence, smiling at her daughter's enthusiasm. She certainly is. Are you being careful? Keith says I'm a natural, Lily replied proudly. Clara glanced at Keith, who shrugged slightly. Kid's got a good seat, he said. No fear in her. Thomas would be pleased, Clara said. He always wanted her to learn to ride. Something flickered in Keith's eyes, understanding, perhaps, or shared grief. You can't survive out here without knowing horses, he said. Might as well start young. That evening at dinner, Lily chattered excitedly about Buttercup, asking Keith question after question about horses. To Clara's surprise, he answered each one patiently, sometimes even smiling at the child's enthusiasm. Can I ride her again tomorrow? Lily asked hopefully. Keith glanced at Clara, deferring to her judgment. It was a small gesture, but significant, an acknowledgement of her authority as Lily's mother. If Mr. Keith has time, Clara said. He has a ranch to run, remember? Got a few minutes for riding lessons, Keith replied. Rodriguez can handle the herd count. After Lily went to bed, Clara found Keith on the porch, smoking a cigarette and staring out at the darkening landscape. She joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. Thank you for being kind to her, Clara said. She hasn't been this animated since her father died. Keith exhaled a plume of smoke. Kids are resilient, more than we give them credit for. Still, Clara persisted, you didn't have to take the time. He was quiet for so long that Clara wondered if he would respond. Finally, he said, my son would have been about her age. The simple statement, delivered without self-pity, struck Clara deeply. I'm sorry, Keith. He stubbed out his cigarette. Don't be, can't change the past. No, Clara agreed, but we can choose how it shapes us. Keith turned to look at her then, really look at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. That's an uncommon perspective for someone who's lost as much as you have. Clara smiled faintly. Perhaps that's why I hold it. Their weeks stretched into 2, then 3. October brought cooler temperatures, and Keith's prediction of early dawn became reality as the days shortened. Clara established a routine cooking, cleaning, mending, and even helping in the small kitchen garden behind the house. Keith never formally acknowledged her continued presence, but neither did he mention her leaving. The ranch hands, initially wary of a woman's presence, gradually warmed to her. Rodriguez taught her to make proper tortillas. Jansen, the youngest cowhand, brought her wildflowers that Lily promptly pressed between the pages of her mother's Bible. Even gruff old Simmons, who rarely spoke to anyone, nodded respectfully when she served extra portions at Sunday dinner. Keith remained more difficult to read. Some days he seemed almost comfortable with their presence, lingering over coffee in the mornings or joining them on the porch after supper. Other days, he retreated into stony silence, disappearing for hours on horseback, returning only after Clara and Lily had gone to bed. "He's hurting something fierce," Rodriguez told her one afternoon as they worked side by side in the garden. "Been that way since Miss Elizabeth passed, but he's better with you here. Less whiskey, more talking." Clara didn't know how to respond to that. She'd seen the haunted look in Keith's eyes, the way he sometimes stared at the closed door of the bedroom he'd once shared with his wife. What right did she have to intrude on such private grief? And yet, there were moments. The way he'd shown Lily how to brush Buttercup's mane. His unexpected laugh when Clara misidentified a tool in the barn. The night she'd found him reading her copy of Pride and Prejudice, claiming he wanted to understand why women found Mr. Darcy appealing. The first winter storm caught them by surprise in early November. Clara woke to find the landscape, transformed a blanket of white covering the ranch, snow still falling heavily. Keith and his men worked frantically to bring the cattle down from the higher pastures, returning after dark, exhausted and half-frozen. Clara had hot food waiting and warm water for washing. As the men ate gratefully, she moved quietly among them, refilling coffee cups, offering seconds, ensuring each had what he needed. When the hands had returned to the bunkhouse, Keith remained at the table, nursing a final cup of coffee. His face was wind-burned, his hands chapped from the cold. "You should rest," Clara said gently. "You've been riding since dawn." "Still got the north herd to check tomorrow," he replied, fatigue evident in his voice. "If this snow keeps up." "You'll manage," Clara said with quiet confidence. "You always do." He looked up at her, something unreadable in his expression. "You have an uncommon faith in a man you barely know." "I know enough," she replied simply. Later, Clara would identify that moment as the turning point. Something shifted between them that night, a fragile trust taking root, an understanding that transcended words. The next morning, Keith lingered over breakfast, watching as Clara prepared food for his saddlebags. "Snow's too deep for you to ride into town," he said abruptly. "You and Lily will have to winter here." Clara's hands stilled. "Are you sure? We've imposed long enough." "It's not an imposition," Keith replied, his voice gruff. "It's common sense. Can't have you freezing to death trying to reach Cottonwood Creek." It was practical, logical, and yet Clara sensed there was more he wasn't saying. "Thank you, Keith." He nodded, avoiding her gaze. "Might want to inventory the pantry, see what supplies we'll need when the trail's clear. Rodriguez can butcher another steer for the smokehouse." "I'll take care of it," Clara promised. Winter settled over the Flying J Ranch like a heavy blanket. Days shortened, the snow piled deeper, and the world contracted to the immediate concerns of survival, keeping warm, tending livestock, preserving food. Yet within this harsh reality, Clara found an unexpected contentment. The ranch house became a haven, filled with the smells of cooking, the sounds of Lily's laughter, and increasingly, Keith's deep voice as he shed some of his reserve. In the evenings, they gathered in the main room. Clara sewed or knitted by the fire's light. Keith whittled or mended tack. Sometimes he read aloud from one of his books, Shakespeare, Dickens, or tall tales of the West that made Lily giggle. The child had taken to following Keith like a shadow during the day, helping with his chores, peppering him with questions that he answered with surprising patience. One night, after Lily had gone to bed, Keith said abruptly, "She needs schooling." Clara looked up from her mending. "Yes, I've been teaching her letters and numbers. In Boston, she would have started proper school this year." Keith nodded thoughtfully. "Cottonwood Creek's growing. Talk of starting a school come spring." Clara's heart skipped. Was he suggesting they would still be here in spring? That would be wonderful for her. Keith was silent for a moment, then said, "My father believed education was important, sent me back east to school for a few years, much as I hated being away from the ranch." Clara studied him with new interest. "Is that where you developed your taste for literature?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Had a teacher who wouldn't let me get away with just reading dime novels, made me try Shakespeare, hated it at first, then couldn't get enough." "You're a man of surprising depths, Keith Jansen," Clara said softly. Something flickered in his eyes, pleasure perhaps, or simple acknowledgement. "Not so surprising, just private." Christmas approached, bringing with it a familiar melancholy for Clara. It would be their first without Thomas, and though she tried to maintain a cheerful demeanor for Lily's sake, the grief sometimes overwhelmed her. Keith, with his own history of loss, seemed to understand without being told. 3 days before Christmas, he disappeared for the entire day, returning at dusk with his saddlebags full, and a small pine tree strapped to his horse. "Thought the girl might like to decorate it," he said gruffly when Clara stared in surprise. "Elizabeth always did." Together they set up the tree in the corner of the main room. Keith produced a box of ornaments from the attic, delicate glass balls, wooden figures, paper angels yellowed with age. "Elizabeth made these," he explained, handling a star fashioned from twisted wire. "She loved Christmas." Clara touched his arm gently. "It's kind of you to share them," he shrugged, but didn't pull away from her touch. "Been packed away too long. Time they saw light again." Lily was ecstatic, carefully hanging each ornament as Keith held her up to reach the higher branches. When the tree was decorated, Keith produced one final surprise from his saddlebag, small gifts for each of them, wrapped in brown paper and string. "It's not much," he said, suddenly awkward. "Just picked them up last time I was in town." For Lily, there was a wooden horse, exquisitely carved and painted to resemble Buttercup. For Clara, a leather-bound journal and pen. "Noticed you writing letters sometimes," he explained. "Thought you might like somewhere proper to put your thoughts." Clara ran her fingers over the smooth leather, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect, Keith. Thank you." That night, after Lily was asleep, Clara sat at the kitchen table writing in her new journal. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear Keith enter until he placed a cup of coffee beside her. "Don't mean to interrupt," he said. "Just thought you might want this." Clara smiled up at him. "Thank you. I was just writing about today the tree," Lily's excitement. Keith hesitated, then sat across from her. "What will you do come spring?" The question caught her off guard. I haven't decided." "You could stay," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "Here, I mean, at the Flying J," Clara's heart stuttered. "Keith, I know it's not what you planned," he continued, words tumbling out now. "It's a hard life, ranching. Isolation, rough work, weather that can kill you if you're not careful, not what a Boston lady would choose. I'm not just a Boston lady, Clara replied softly. No, he agreed, meeting her gaze. You're a lot more than that. He took a deep breath. I've watched you these past months. You're strong, Clara, resilient, kind even when the world hasn't been kind to you. As are you, she said. He shook his head. I was bitter after Elizabeth died. Angry at God, at the doctor who couldn't save her, at myself for not being there when it happened. I shut down, shut everyone out. Grief does that, Clara said gently. Maybe, but it's no way to live. His green eyes held her steadily. You and Lily, you've brought something back to this place. Light, purpose. He hesitated, then added quietly, hope. Clara felt tears welling in her eyes. We found that here too. Keith reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. I'm not asking for promises, just consider staying, not as a housekeeper or a charity case. As. He faltered. As what, Keith? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. As family, he said finally. In whatever way makes sense to you. Clara turned her hand beneath his, twining their fingers together. I think I'd like that very much. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the snow glistening in the winter sunlight. Clara woke early to prepare a special breakfast, only to find Keith already in the kitchen, awkwardly attempting to make pancakes. Thought I'd let you sleep in, he explained, looking sheepish as batter dripped from the spoon he was holding. Not going so well, though, Clara laughed, moving to his side. Here, let me help. Together, they prepared the meal, moving around each other in the small kitchen with an ease that spoke of growing comfort. When Lily bounded downstairs, eyes wide at the sight of the decorated tree with presents beneath it, Keith and Clara exchanged a glance of shared pleasure. The day passed in a haze of simple joys, a festive meal shared with the ranch hands, singing carols around the fire, and stories of Christmases past. As evening fell, Lily fell asleep on the rug before the fire, clutching her new wooden horse. Keith carefully lifted the child and carried her upstairs, Clara following behind. Together they tucked her into bed, Clara brushing a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. She looks like you, Keith observed softly. She has her father's smile, Clara replied, and his curiosity. Keith nodded, understanding in his eyes. He'd be proud of how you've raised her. They returned downstairs, the house quiet now except for the crackling of the fire. Keith poured 2 small glasses of whiskey, handing one to Clara. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. Clara met his toast, and cherished memories. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. After a while, Keith reached for her hand, his touch tentative. I've been thinking, he said. About what I said yesterday. Clara's heart quickened. Yes. I wasn't entirely honest. He met her gaze, vulnerability plain in his green eyes. When I asked you to stay, I didn't just mean as family in some vague way. What did you mean, Keith? Clara asked, though she thought she knew. I meant as my wife, he said simply. Not now, it's too soon, I know that, but someday when you're ready. He squeezed her hand gently. I never thought I'd feel this way again after Elizabeth. Never wanted to, but you and Lily, you've brought me back to life. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. I wasn't looking for this either, she admitted. When I came here, I was just seeking shelter, a safe place for Lily. And now, Keith's voice was barely audible. Clara smiled through her tears. Now I think I've found home. Keith released her hand, only to gently cup her face. May I kiss you, Clara Davenport? In answer, she leaned forward, meeting his lips with her own. The kiss was tender, unhurried, a promise rather than a demand, the beginning of something precious and rare. When they finally parted, Keith rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Not just for the winter, stay for good. Clara nodded, her heart too full for words. The widow who had come seeking shelter, had found something far more valuable: a second chance at love, a new family, and a man whose broken heart matched her own, healing together in the wild beauty of the Arizona territory. As snow began to fall outside, blanketing the Flying J Ranch in pristine white, Clara and Keith remained by the fire, talking softly of the future they would build together, a future neither had dared hope for, but which now stretched before them like an undiscovered country, full of promise and possibility.